Rain drummed against the hospital window as David Martinez held his father's trembling hand for the last time. The morphine made the old man's words slur together, but 3 syllables cut through the fog with terrifying clarity. "Tell Maria. Sorry." David had never heard that name before. His father had been married to his mother for 35 years. They had built their life in the same small town, attended the same church every Sunday, shared the same circle of friends. Yet here was a woman's name, spoken with such desperate urgency that it seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime's regret. The funeral drew exactly 47 people to St. Catherine's Cemetery on a grey February morning in Phoenix. David recognized every face except one, a woman in her late 50s standing 20 feet from the grave, clutching the hand of a young man who bore an unsettling resemblance to David himself. They arrived separately, left separately, and never approached the family. The psychological weight of unasked questions settled over David like a shroud. Who watches a stranger's burial with tears in their eyes? For 3 weeks after the service, David found himself driving past the cemetery at 6:15 a.m. on his way to work, slowing down near his father's grave. The woman never returned, but the questions multiplied. His father had been methodical about everything in life, keeping detailed records of appointments, expenses, even grocery lists. Yet in 43 years of marriage, he had never once mentioned having other children. The silence felt deliberate, calculated, and deeply unsettling. The first crack in his father's carefully maintained facade appeared in Box 142 at Arizona National Bank. David had power of attorney, but the safety deposit box required a second key, one that wasn't on his father's keyring. The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, consulted her records with bureaucratic precision. The second key holder was listed as Maria Elena Vasquez, authorized since 1993. The psychological phenomenon of cognitive dissonance kicked in immediately. David's mind rejected what his eyes were seeing. His father, married to his mother for 47 years, had given another woman access to his most private documents. The authorization form bore his father's unmistakable signature, witnessed by 2 bank employees. David stared at the paperwork for 3 full minutes, his hands trembling. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat politely, explaining that both key holders must be present to access the contents. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as David processed this revelation. His father's secret had been hiding in plain sight, protected by metal and bureaucracy, for 28 years. 3 weeks of sleepless nights led David to hire Patricia Webb, a private investigator whose office reeked of stale coffee and broken promises. Her first report arrived via encrypted email at 11:47 p.m. on March 15th. Maria Elena Vasquez, age 58, employed at Desert View Elementary for 23 years, residing at 1247 Cactus Bloom Drive, exactly 4.2 miles from David's childhood home. The psychological term for this sensation is emotional flooding, when too much information overwhelms the mind's ability to process reality. Patricia's report contained 47 pages of surveillance data, financial records spanning 12 years, and employment verification from 3 different school districts. The woman worked double shifts, drove a 2019 Honda Civic, and lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom house with a small garden visible from the street. David stared at her photograph for 23 minutes, searching for any resemblance to the face he carried in fragmented childhood memories. The second report shattered what remained of David's understanding. Michael Anthony Vasquez, born September 12, 1995, exactly 1 year after David's own birth. Honor roll student, baseball scholarship to Arizona State, currently a junior studying mechanical engineering, the same field David's father had mastered decades earlier. The photographs showed a young man with the Martinez jawline, the same dark eyes, even the identical scar above the left eyebrow that ran in their family. The psychological defense mechanism of denial crumbled like sand. David's hands trembled as he studied Michael's academic transcript. A 3.8 GPA, Dean's List for 3 consecutive semesters, member of the Engineering Honor Society. This wasn't some random connection or coincidence. The evidence painted a picture of a young man who had inherited not just physical traits, but intellectual capabilities that mirrored David's own academic achievements. The father who had abandoned David had been present for someone else's graduation ceremonies, birthday celebrations, and milestone moments that David had navigated alone. Bank records painted a meticulous portrait of deception. For 32 years, Roberto Martinez had maintained 2 separate accounts, 2 insurance policies, 2 Christmas traditions. Every second Saturday, he would disappear for work emergencies that lasted exactly 8 hours. School recitals, birthday parties, graduation ceremonies. Roberto had lived 2 complete lives with surgical precision. The psychological weight of systematic betrayal is different from spontaneous infidelity. It suggests a calculated emotional investment that cuts deeper than passion ever could. Financial forensics revealed $247,000 in duplicate expenses over 3 decades. 2 mortgage payments, 2 sets of utility bills, 2 separate vacation funds. Each family received identical birthday gifts, purchased 1 day apart. Roberto's phone contained 14,000 text messages, carefully time-stamped to avoid overlap. His calendar showed a complex rotation system that required mathematical precision to maintain. This wasn't just adultery, it was architectural deception, built layer by layer into an impossible double existence. David began his own surveillance on a humid Tuesday evening in April, parking across from Desert View Elementary at 3:15 p.m. sharp. Maria emerged at 3:42, her movements graceful despite the weight of grief that seemed to follow her like a shadow. She drove a silver Honda Civic, the same model his father had always recommended as the most reliable car made. David maintained a distance of exactly 47 meters, close enough to observe but far enough to remain undetected. He documented her routine with military precision. Tuesday grocery store at 4:12 p.m., Wednesday library visit lasting 23 minutes, Thursday evening walks that covered approximately 1.2 miles through Riverside Park. The psychological concept of cognitive confirmation explains why David suddenly noticed all the small details that had been hidden in plain sight his entire life. Each observation felt like assembling pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed, revealing patterns that connected his past to this woman's present in ways that defied coincidence. The house at 1247 Cactus Bloom Drive looked exactly like a home Roberto Martinez would choose. Adobe walls, desert landscaping, a red tile roof that matched their family house in every detail except the address. Michael's truck sat in the driveway, a 1999 Ford F-150, identical to the one Roberto had taught David to drive. The psychological term dissociation barely captured the sensation of watching your life played out by strangers who somehow weren't strangers at all. Every element was familiar, yet everything was wrong. David counted 14 similarities between this house and his childhood home. The same wrought iron gate, identical porch light fixtures, even the same brand of mailbox positioned at the exact same angle. The Martinez family had lived in their original house for 23 years, and now here was Michael, recreating every detail with obsessive precision. This wasn't random coincidence, this was deliberate reconstruction of a life that wasn't his to claim. Dr. Sarah Kim, the family therapist David had started seeing twice weekly, called it approach avoidance conflict during their May 3rd session. Part of him desperately needed answers. Another part feared that some truths are too destructive to bear. The decision crystallized at 2:17 a.m. on a sleepless Friday night. He would knock on the door at 1247 Cactus Bloom Drive that weekend. The psychological preparation for this moment had consumed 73 days of his life, spanning 146 hours of active worry and 23 detailed mental rehearsals of possible scenarios. He practiced opening lines 47 times, each variation carefully crafted to sound casual while probing for information. His pulse accelerated 15 beats per minute whenever he imagined Lisa's potential reactions. 3 different backup plans existed in case the conversation turned hostile. Nothing could truly prepare him for what lay ahead, but David knew the uncertainty was becoming more unbearable than any truth could possibly be. Saturday morning arrived with brutal Arizona sunshine. David stood on the porch for exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds before knocking. Maria answered the door, and her face went through a sequence of emotions. Confusion, recognition, and finally a resigned sadness that suggested she had been expecting this moment for months. She invited him in without asking his name. The psychological phenomenon of implicit recognition explains how two strangers can immediately understand their shared tragedy without words. Maria led him to her living room, where 17 condolence cards still sat unopened on the coffee table. The silence stretched for 2 minutes before either spoke. David noticed the way she gripped her coffee mug with both hands, knuckles white with tension. Maria studied his face, searching for traces of the person who had taken her daughter's life. Neither had prepared for how ordinary the other would look, how human and breakable they both appeared in the harsh morning light streaming through her windows. Maria's living room contained 18 framed photographs of Roberto, at birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and quiet family dinners that David had never been part of. She spoke in a voice weathered by 3 decades of careful secrets. Roberto had told her about his first family from the beginning, explaining that his wife's mental illness made divorce impossible. The psychological manipulation was masterful in its simplicity. He had convinced both families that they were protecting the other from unbearable pain. Maria had believed she was being compassionate by accepting only Tuesday evenings and alternate weekends. She had raised their son believing his father was a traveling businessman who worked extensive contracts. For 28 years, she had celebrated birthdays alone, spent every Christmas morning waiting for Roberto's afternoon visit, and never questioned why she could never call him at home. The photographs told the story of a parallel life built entirely around another man's convenience. Michael returned home at 2:35 p.m., carrying textbooks and wearing a mechanical engineering polo shirt from ASU. The brothers stood 3 feet apart in a suburban kitchen, studying each other's faces like mirrors, reflecting different angles of the same genetic truth. Michael had known about David his entire life. Roberto had shown him photographs and shared stories about his older brother who lived with his sick mother. The psychological concept of parallel processing explained how 2 sons could grow up loving the same man without ever questioning his weekend absences. Michael had calculated that Roberto spent approximately 72 hours per week at their house, leaving 96 hours unaccounted for. As an engineering student, he understood systems and redundancy. What he hadn't understood until this moment was that he and David were both backup systems in their father's carefully constructed life architecture. 2 families, 2 sons, 2 versions of devotion operating on separate circuits, but drawing power from the same source. The full scope emerged over 3 hours of painful conversation. Roberto had attended Michael's high school graduation on the same day as David's college graduation, telling each son that work obligations prevented his attendance at the other's ceremony. He had coached Michael's little league team while claiming overtime shifts to David's mother. The psychological term compartmentalization took on new meaning. Roberto hadn't just lived 2 lives, he had become 2 completely different versions of himself. David discovered 47 photographs of Michael's birthday parties spanning 8 years, while Michael found receipts for David's college tuition payments totaling $23,000. Roberto had maintained separate bank accounts, separate holiday traditions, even separate favorite restaurants for each family. The man who taught David to fish every summer was the same man who took Michael camping every winter. 2 sons, 2 complete childhoods, orchestrated by one father who had perfected the art of emotional fraud across 18 years. David faced a choice that no psychology textbook could guide him through. Maria and Michael had loved the same man he had called father, but they had loved a version of Roberto that David was only now discovering, one who was present, engaged, and emotionally available in ways his father had never been with his first family. The decision took exactly 11 days of deliberation, each day weighing the consequences of 3 possible paths: pursue a relationship with his half-brother and Maria, expose Roberto's secret to his mother, or walk away from everything entirely. He studied their family photos online, noticed how Roberto's eyes crinkled differently when he smiled with them, how his posture seemed more relaxed. David realized he wasn't just choosing between relationships, but between versions of truth. Some truths serve no purpose except to multiply suffering across multiple generations of innocent people. 6 months later, David still drives past Desert View Elementary sometimes, though he never stops. The psychological concept of ambiguous loss perfectly describes his grief, mourning not just his father's death, but the death of his understanding of who his father was. Box 142 remains unopened at Arizona National Bank, its secrets locked away with both keys now in David's possession. He has learned that some mysteries are more bearable when they remain unsolved, and that the most complex human emotions exist not in black and white, but in the grey shadows between truth and mercy. His therapist tells him that healing from betrayal trauma takes an average of 18 months. But David knows his journey will be longer. The photograph of his father still sits on his mantelpiece, but now it carries different weight. Sarah calls every few weeks, their conversations careful but genuine. They share the unique burden of loving someone who turned out to be a stranger. In his desk drawer, David keeps the bank deposit slip, not as evidence, but as a reminder that even good people can make choices that defy understanding.